Hello everyone, how are you doing? Welcome to this lecture number 4. We will talk about ecosystems and biodiversity, the different threats that we're having, also the value of them and how to protect them. That will be, I think, split into 4 videos of about 10 minutes or so. I will try to just go between 10 to 15 minutes. And if you do have any feedback, question, of course, feel free to contact me to, to express any thing that you'd like to share. For this lecture, a couple of learning outcomes. First, having an idea of what are the ecosystems, services, and why they are important for our society, how they benefit us. Then having a clear vision about the different threat that our human society is imposing on biodiversity. Before we can move towards more strategies about how to conserve, restore, protect the biodiversity and the ecosystem, and in some way how we can build a society that is more respectful to the biodiversity. So all of those are kind of learning outcomes coming from that lecture. But before we do start the lecture, I didn't forget to ask you one question. Oh, I forgot about this little animation first. The question is, why can't 2 elephants go swimming? Any idea? No, not sure. Well, it's just because they only have 1 pair of trunks. Hey, good one. All right, with that, let's really start and looking at what we're gonna cover today with those videos. We look at the values of biodiversity, why we should care about it really more than what we do maybe now. What are the different threats on the biodiversity? And then, as I mentioned, we'll look at how we should protect the different strategies to protect biodiversity. So let's look first at the values. And so when we speak about values of biodiversity, we kind of have it already inside of these figures. We have, of course, an economic value, but not only, we have some cultural, spiritual, social, genetic value, ecological, intrinsic, educational, aesthetic, recreational value. So we do have some kind of different values, but of course, economically, it's one of the major ones. So when we talk about biological or biodiversity benefits, in fact, we refer to the ecosystem services. And we talked already about ecosystem services. Those are benefits we get from the ecosystem that tend to be usually regulation within the ecosystem. They can be, we mentioned about the regulation, the provisioning services. So the resources we can get initially, the resources would be, for example, the fuel, the timber, what we can access physically from it, but we have also the regulating services. We mentioned about that, about, for example, pollination, filtering of air, filtering of water, the climate regulation. We do also have some cultural services, which is, when you go outside and you kind of feel good, that's part of it. It's a service that you get from the outdoor. And then we do have also some support services, which allows us to have our foundation as a species, as a living organism, such as all the cycling being part of this planet, the primary production that is at the beginning of this, at the bottom part of the food web, for example. So it has a lot of benefits, and in fact, most of it can be kind of estimated in terms of money, and indirectly, we tend to underestimate it. It's difficult to give a price to it. But in 1997, it was estimated that about 33 trillions of dollars, in fact, were the value of the ecosystem services we were depending on, that we were using. And we took it, for free. We didn't pay nature for that. Most recent information kind of come in 2018, saying that, in fact, since we are taking more, extracting more, nowadays and of course we have a better estimate too, I forgot to mention, but potentially the estimate is up to $125 trillion of resources we get from nature in itself. And you have here a table of the 1997 estimation going to the $33 trillion, where we get a lot from the ocean, the coast, for example. You see that one of the major one is wetlands, because in fact for agricultural resources, it's kind of the best. Lakes and rivers followed as a second, then coastal, tropical region, and you see the other ones right there. So that was the estimate like almost 30 years ago. A more recent one kind of made the price getting of almost 4 times more. It's for sure over this more than $140 trillion per year that we get for free, which is higher than the world economy, the outcome of the world economy estimated by about 85 trillion. So we're mostly producing half of the money that the nature is giving us, or are we taking for free? And there is always new resources or unused resources that we kind of taking over time. For example, new type of food resources available in different countries that can be either plants or animals, but also there is a huge potential for pharmaceutical reason, because we do obtain a lot of chemical compounds from natural plants, and then of course we can synthesize them, but half of our pharmaceutical medicines nowadays is coming directly from biodiversity, from plants. And we've seen that there is a pretty good equilibrium normally between the biodiversity and the ecology and the ecosystem around it. We do have normally the life part right here, with an equilibrium happening between the ecosystem structure made up of the non-living part and the living part, which tend to be structured with a food web. We do have it functioning and interacting well together. And then on the side, when it's functioning all well together, it's bringing some benefits for all living organisms. And on our side, well, we tend to add our own pressure on those ecosystems. So in some way, we're coming with this extra part on the butterfly representation of this equilibrium, where the butterfly, instead of being at equilibrium, start to kind of tangle on one side because we're adding more and more pressure, diminishing the other portion. And so scientists have been looking at that impact on nature by looking at how our ecosystems are dealing, but also by looking at specifically some species, because also it's kind of a maybe easy way publicly for the people to be more aware about what's going badly. And so for that, I mean, scientists have been following the behavior, the demography, so the change in population in some species, and mostly to know if an ecosystem is doing okay or bad, they're following up, for example, indicator species. Indicator species are specific species. Most of the time, they tend to be amphibians, birds, or insects, because those species are very sensitive to changes in their environment. And so if we look at a decline of a population, such as the spotted owl, it's giving us an information that, in fact, the ecosystem around it, the environment, is not doing good. If there is an increase of population, in fact, it might say that it's thriving, it's going well. So we're using those species, we're following up the evolution of the population to have an idea of how they do and how the ecosystem does. We can use also lichens or fungus, to follow the air quality. They are pretty good at letting us know on how much air pollution there is. Usually the decline of the population tend to be related to the amount of those that we can find in rocks and trees. We do observe, for example, an evolution of different species in insects depending on the water quality. If a water tend to be pretty pristine with almost no pollution, we might just find this type of insect, like a stonefly nymph. But if the water tend to be very, very dirty, we're moving towards other species, moving, for example, towards worms, which indicate us that there is a strong pollution in the water that we're looking at. So those are pretty good indicators, information regarding the pollution, regarding the environment surrounding them. You may have heard about the second type of species, keystone species. We are taking care, well, at least we're trying to protect keystone species because they tend to have they are species with a very high impact contribution to the ecosystem, to the environment. And those species are specific. For example, in this slide, you have an example with a wolf, but you also have an example with the sea stars, for example. And so both of those species, in fact, are keystone species because they regulate by their behavior, by or how to say, by their place in the ecosystem, they regulate the population of other species. They usually tend to be on the upper part of the food web, and they tend to be natural regulator of the other species, which allow the ecosystem to be in a kind of an equilibrium. If you remove wolves or the sea star, you in fact disturbing the equilibrium. In this case, for example, with the sea star or starfish, if you would be removing it, what would happen is all of the intermediate species will start growing more and more, and at this point they will consume the base of the food web, and the food web will just decline, kind of fall by itself. And the same with the wolf. By declining the population of the wolf, you will increase the population of the deers, and all of the plants will start decreasing in terms of quantity. And so you will, in fact, at least lower down the quality of the ecosystem, if not partially destroy it. So keystone species are very important. In another type of species we are very careful with are native species. It's species that we found only in a specific region of the world or a specific ecosystem. We don't find them anywhere else. For example, Costa Rica has a lot of native species, a lot of frogs that are very well fit with the environment, but any change with the environment tend to be harsh for them to survive. So those species are very limited and very protected in itself because they have a major role in the ecosystem and are just perfectly fitted. And we observe, unfortunately, for example, with global warming happening, that those species, unfortunately, little by little go extinct. Another type of species we are trying to be careful with are the non-native species, or also called invasive species. Those are mostly species we bring with our activities. A lot of species came when, for example, a couple of centuries ago, we were exploring the world on boats. We brought with us, without the willing, of course, but we brought with us rats or rabbits, or for our for cattle, we brought, for example, sheep, and all of those species are kind of invaded places they were not supposed to be. In fact, rats are supposed to be coming from the Western Asia, but nowadays they're everywhere because of, well, of us. We brought them with us without our willing, in fact. But still, they tend to usually do better in the environment. We will see that reason in just a little bit on why, but they usually tend to thrive in new environments. And one of the local example of invasive species in Merced would be the eucalyptus tree. I don't know the reason why the city has decided to have eucalyptus trees, but they tend to be very resistant. They have some very strong acidity with the resin they release, and they avoid plants to live around them. And so, and they are pretty good, of course, of reproducing. And so they had to cut down a lot of trees in Merced because of these issues of invasive species. Final one to speak about of the type of different species to be careful with is engineer species. Engineer species would be those organisms that tend to modify the environment, but modified in a good way. They will modify mostly, they will have impact on the non-living part. As you can see, they're changing the non-living part, which will have impact on the living part. So for example, it can be such as the elephant right here that will be modifying the non-living part by moving rocks, or by modifying the living parts by moving down the trees, which will in fact allows new habitats to be created for other species, or providing food resources to other species. Mountain lion, which tend to be more keystone species, can also sometimes be seen as an engineer species. To be honest, most of the time it tends to be more like a keystone species for its action, but sometimes you see you have potential double responsibility. The beaver, for example, can be also considered as an ecosystem engineer because it's modifying the flow of the rivers by its own building. So those ecosystems, those species or ecosystem engineer help for the ecosystem to be resilient. Remember the capacity of adapting to a change in the environment. And I forgot to mention also, keystone species tend to be very important also for the resilience of an ecosystem. If you're removing keystone species, the ecosystem, the food web of the ecosystem goes down and the ecosystem goes down in itself. So those two types are very important for the stability of those ecosystems. Again, if you're removing them, you're impacting on a lot of other species. And in general, it's a bad impact on the other species. With that, I will stop with the first video. We're reaching 15 minutes. So I promise you between 10 to 15 minutes for each video. So finishing up with this part, and whenever you're ready, come, start video number 2. See you in a bit.